Budgeting 101. I'm so glad that you are here and so glad to be able to just share this next about 50 minutes with you guys and really talk about some of the things that we can learn about budgeting. So first thing we're going to do is jump in with some quick stats. But before we do that, we want to make sure we have time to answer any questions you may have. So we are going to save about the last 10 minutes of our breakout room session for those questions so that we make sure we have that opportunity. You can utilize the chat to answer those or to ask those questions. And then my lovely partner in crime here, Laura Cobb, will keep track of those. And then at the end, when we get to our question and answer session, she'll go ahead and give me those questions so we can answer them. So we are going to jump in with some quick facts. After 2020, we all remember that wonderful year that we had. Things for all of us financially were a little different. Things changed for a lot of us, and I'm going to hit you with some quick stats in regards to that. First things first, costs are up. So as you may have noticed, supply and demand has caused some of our regular everyday costs to go up, as well as unemployment is currently up. So we noticed that in 2020, unemployment spiked to an all-time high for us in this area at least, and leveled out to a still slightly elevated 6.7%. And the other really important thing here that we learned is that nearly 40% of adults say that they are currently in financial survival mode. So almost half of all adults don't think that they are thriving, not even feeling stable, that they are in a mode of just financial survival, just getting through the next day to the next paycheck. So that's one of the key things that we're going to go over today is how to help us not feel like we're in that survival mode. So let's go through a few extra hard-hitting stats. The average American household credit card debt is right around $7,000 or almost $8,000. In Idaho, we're at just mid $7,000 as average for our household credit card debt. For balance carrying households, that number is almost double that. $14,353 is the average for balance carrying households. These are households that carry a balance from month to month and are not paying off those credit cards every single month. So I know we think about how it might be easy for us to possibly work through the money that we have set aside and how quickly that money seems to go. One thing that I discovered at the end, right after this session last year, was this pretty incredible thing. What does it take to blow through $10,000 in a single year? To just blow through that money and not have any left over? It's not as much as you might think. $27.40 a day on maybe less critical spending, or some may call it frivolous spending, is all it takes to blow through $10,000 in a single year, is $27.40 a day on frivolous spending or things that maybe aren't necessary. Perhaps for you, that is ordering from DoorDash or Uber Eats because we don't leave our household very often. Those are the kinds of things that very, very quickly add up. In 2020, our average back to school expenses for a household were right around $700 in a household. And that could be households that have several children. It may be households that have one child or two children in school, but average back to school expenses were over $700. It's a lot to spend on one particular topic. Now, this is where our numbers get even more elevated. The cost of a wedding in 2019 was over $33,000 for an average. I don't know about you, but that was a lot of money to spend on a single day. And the percentage of Americans who currently feel like they are living paycheck to paycheck is a lot higher than you might think. 63% of Americans say that they feel like they are living paycheck to paycheck, meaning at the end of that pay cycle, there isn't a lot of money or isn't any money left over before that next paycheck is received. We heard this stat earlier this morning as well, which I was thrilled to hear reinforced. The percentage of Americans who feel like their retirement savings are on track, meaning they are ready, that if once they hit their retirement age and they are ready to retire, that what they're doing now is going to be enough, is only 24%. That's 1/4 of adults under the age of 60 who feel like, I think I'm going to be okay once I retire. Hopefully, we can talk through some things that will help us feel more like we are on track for that. We're going to hit with a couple more stats, and then we'll jump into what we are here to talk about today. Number of Americans who have overdrafted their account in the last 12 months is approximately 30%. So about 1/3 of Americans have overdrafted their checking account in the last 12 months. And this is probably the most shocking statistic of all. The percentage of Americans who don't have any sort of budget, 68%. 68% of adults say they don't have any sort of plan for their finances. Now, here's the good news, and probably why you're here today, is that there is a large percentage of Americans who feel like they would benefit from some kind of financial advice. Maybe that is meeting with an accountant. Maybe that is utilizing some of the tools we're going to talk about later today. Maybe it's simply attending this session. So we have approximately 81% of Americans say, you know what, I would benefit from some kind of help, which is probably why you're here today, because you fall under that 80%. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We are going to distinguish between our short and long-term savings and what those things mean. We're also going to understand the value and characteristics of a plan to make sure that we know why it's important to have a plan. And then the most important step of all, we're going to start building our own budgets. So hopefully we're excited about that today. I know that budgeting is not always the world's most attractive topic, but it is such an important thing for us to talk about, and such a critical thing that is one of the most basic things we can do to eliminate some of the stresses in our lives. So let's jump in. I've been there. I've been the person who is trying to beat the checks to the bank. I've been the person who is stretching that last dollar or using credit cards to make it until payday. I've been the person who bought whatever I wanted, but then felt that later stress when I didn't have the finances to meet other obligations. We've all been in that situation, I think, at one point or another in our lives, and that's why we're here today, to go over some of the basics of our budgeting plan. One of the resources that we will provide to you is a handout, and it's what we would normally in an in-person environment would have given you each one of these on your seat, but in a virtual environment, we'll give you a link to download this document. And this document is a great beginner for getting your budget started. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview of what that document is going to look like. Some of the key things that we will go over are listed here, but it really is the beginning of setting that successful financial plan. So let's get started. Important thing to remember is that you know what you want to do. And I really, really love this quote from Earl Nightingale that talks about why people with goals succeed. And when you have those goals, what makes you successful? Really, it is knowing where you're going, knowing what you want to accomplish, and then taking the steps toward that. And we heard that in our general session this morning as well, that it doesn't matter what your income is, that your financial plan begins with making those goals and making them attainable goals, making them something that you can easily take action on to obtain those goals. So there are 2 steps to being successful in our financial plan. Step 1, figure out what that plan is. Figure out what you want to do. Maybe in 10 years, you want to be completely out of debt. Maybe you want to buy a home in the next 5 years. Maybe you want to make sure that you have X number of dollars set aside for retirement. Step one is create a plan. Decide what that end goal is. And step two is to make sure that the budget that you have created follows that plan. I am so excited to get into the nitty-gritty of these things because some of this has to do with short-term savings, some of it has to do with long-term savings, but most of it has to do with just being aware of what you're doing. So let's talk short-term savings first. Short-term savings is all about putting money aside for a specific purpose. And generally that's something that's going to come up in a relatively short period of time. Maybe it's you want to take a trip in a few months. Maybe it's that you are getting ready to purchase a car. Maybe it's just that you want to pay off this credit card in 2 months. Usually it's a relatively short span of time. And when we say relatively short span, it generally is around a year or less away. I'm going to show you my favorite thing that I use or that I save for on a regular basis, which is, there might be some things like a trip, as we mentioned. Maybe you're purchasing a car in the near future. My favorite is Disney. So I am 30 years old and there's nothing I love more than vacationing in a Disney park. There's something magical about it, something just different about the environment in Disney. And so I have made that a goal. I had intended last year, and in fact, when I presented last year at Smart Women, Smart Money, I had just returned from what was supposed to be the first of 6 trips to Disney last year to celebrate turning 30. And then that all stopped because of a global pandemic. But I've just also returned from a family trip to Disney World because it's my favorite thing to save for. And it's something that is an attainable goal. It's something that I have pictures all over my home of different trips that I've taken. And it is something that keeps me feeling like I can work toward other things, but also gives me something that I can enjoy. So one thing to keep in mind as we move forward is that budgeting does not have to be something that you dread. It does not have to be something that is the dark cloud hanging over your head. Budgeting can be fun. And it's important to allow yourself some of that fun. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So let's talk about some of those strategies for short-term savings. Some that you may have used yourself, some that you may have your kids using, or you may see other people using. Obviously, some pretty easy ones are setting it aside in like a piggy bank, right? Maybe that piggy bank is something that when you get to a certain time, you'll break that open, take your trip, do whatever you want to do with that money. There are a number of other things as well that could be utilized here. We have something like a certificate of deposit, which may earn money on the money that you've set aside and you've started saving. There are money market accounts. Some people store money under their mattresses or in other places that might be less easy to access. Traditional savings accounts, and there is also the envelope method. I really like the envelope method because I'm a visual person. It's something that allows me to see how things are broken down. And it doesn't have to be an exact envelope if that's not who you are, but setting things aside in specific ways that are budgeted for specific things. This month I have X number of dollars set aside if I want to eat out. This amount is set aside specifically to put gas in my car. This amount is set aside specifically just for the fun things that I want to do. This money is set aside for savings. It's an easy way to really break down the funds that you have and give each dollar a purpose, which we're going to get to an important quote from Dave Ramsey about that in a little bit. These are definitely some possibilities, and there may be others for short-term savings. I have my particular method of short-term savings is I actually have an entire checking account that has a debit card that I have no access to. I opened the account, made sure that there were no branches in my area, and that if I needed a debit card for it when I'm ready to make that purchase, that then I call up the bank, they send me a debit card and I use it. But it makes it more difficult for me to access those funds outside of what the purpose is. So I have an account that's opened with a bank that's based in Utah, and there are no branches around me. So when I set that money aside, a specific amount of my paycheck goes into that account automatically. So it's auto deposited, and I can't touch it unless I call and get that access to that debit card. It's something that works for me. I know in our general session this morning, the topic of freezing your credit card came up, and I kind of equate that with the same thing, is that I make it impossible for me to access those funds until it's absolutely time. So these are just some of the possibilities for short-term savings that people might utilize. There are many more for long-term that we're going to get to in a few moments. But if you have questions about how to access these things, we're going to also reference some resources that will be available to you as far as things that you can utilize for those short-term or long-term savings. So let's talk now about what long-term savings means. Long-term savings is putting money away for a future expense that's possibly a relatively long distance away, or maybe an expense that is a longer period of time that you'll require it. Some things that come to mind are obviously housing. If you're purchasing a house, that's a long-term commitment to making that payment and to having those funds available. A car can generally be in that category as well, because usually a car payment is somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Education for either yourself or your children or others that you may be helping with education costs. And then the big one we've talked about several times today already, retirement. That one is probably the one that we have the most access to ways to saving, and also is the one that gets most neglected. So I'm going to give it just a moment here. How many, I don't know, I think the chat is going. How many of you guys have something that you're thinking of right now, either short-term or long-term, that you know that you are trying to set aside money for? And you can just give me a yes in the chat, or you can give me a thumbs up. Aha, thank you. Getting that all loaded. So I see got some information coming through our chat here. So we all have something, it looks like, that we might be saving for, which is great. You have something in mind. And the key for that, as we talked about in our general session and today, is knowing what you want, knowing what that goal is, and having that set in mind. And we are going to answer some of these questions about that we can see we see coming through the chat here as we get to our Q&A session at the end. I do see a comment that somebody wants to take their kid to Disney. And let me tell you, I am great at planning a Disney trip on a budget. So I just got back from Disney World, and as soon as Disneyland reopens, I will be right back there to enjoy some Disney magic again. But we all have something that we are probably saving for. Maybe that's retirement. Maybe it's a home. I see a couple of things in there as well, other places that we might be living. So we've heard some references to some of those long-term savings plans in our previous sessions. And our first one that we talked about is possibly an IRA or a 401k. IRA is an individual retirement account. It is that way for you to set aside money specifically for that purpose. So an IRA and 401k are designed for money to be set aside and not be able to be accessed until you're at the point of retirement. Some other options might be investing in stocks and bonds or interest-bearing savings. And probably the one that I I struggle with the most is finding places to cut spending in other places so that I can set it aside in an interest-bearing savings account or set more aside in my 401k. So I see a lot of great things that people are working toward, and we want to make sure that we are recognizing those goals and working toward them in a realistic way. So these are some of the strategies for long-term savings, but some of you guys I know are wondering, what if I need help? What if I need somebody who can really guide me through this process more than a presenter at Smart Women, Smart Money? The great thing about financial plan assistance is that there is no shortage of assistance available to you. So there are bankers, maybe somebody you trust at your local bank that could help you. There are people who are certified in this financial planning. There are courses that you can take through local schools or some through community education types of things. You might have peers or people that you really trust that can help you. There's also no limit to the amount of things that are available on the internet. And we all know that the first thing we do when we need to find something is Google, right? I know that's one of the things I always say that I learned from my dad is how to Google things effectively. So we might be able to find exactly what we're looking for, even on the internet or through the media. We are going to talk about some specific resources that are available to you a little bit later. So, and I'll give you some sites that I have used personally, as well as sites that come highly recommended that would be helpful could potentially be helpful. The other great thing is that you are here at Smart Women, Smart Money. So there are many, many of our presenters and many resources that are here for us today that could give you access to that assistance as well. And I would highly recommend you look at those booths, and I hope you took a chance before this session to look at some of those virtual booths, and you take a little bit more opportunity later to do that as well, because the resources that are here for a reason. So we want to make sure that we brought together all of the resources that could possibly be helpful for you in a way that makes it easy to access. I do see a couple of comments that, I didn't know about investment clubs. Those are a great resource if that's something that you're interested in, because a lot of those clubs have people of varying experience. So you might be able to learn from people who have long-term experience and learn with people who may have less experience. So we've talked about options for short-term savings and long-term savings and where we might get assistance. Well, let's talk about that written plan. Here are some of the major advantages to having a plan written out. Number one, it really makes you focus and helps you remember what it is that you're working toward. Number two, you can refer back to it and really keep that in mind of what it is that you're working toward. One thing that can also be helpful, put it somewhere that you can see it at all times. Maybe it's on your bathroom mirror. And the key to this is that your written plan is not set in stone. Just because you write it down doesn't mean that it cannot change. Not only can it change, but it should change. As different things in your life evolve, as you change positions in work, as you have different goals that you're reaching toward, that should be reviewed and revised regularly. So we have that as our things to remember. Also remember that to work through this plan with somebody that you trust. Maybe it's a financial planner. One thing that was talked about in our general session with a couple of amazing businesswomen who own their own businesses is that they reached out to people who were experts in those fields. And that's such a critical thing for us to do, is to recognize, especially for these things that we may feel like I'm not great at this, to reach out to somebody who is a professional and who really knows how to handle those different things so that they can provide that expertise. I see a couple of comments in the chat about a few things that people have utilized themselves, and that's a great way. A couple of those resources we're going to talk about. Also remember, it's going to take a while to get this right. It's going to take a while. You're not going to wake up tomorrow morning after having written your plan today and everything, all of your budget will be perfect and you'll have the exact everything set aside exactly as you need it. That's just not the way that life works. So it's important for us to understand that it's going to take a while to get it right. And that's why it should be living. It should be adaptable. And the most important thing to remember here, don't give up on it. Everything you do, every goal you achieve you're going to come across some difficulties, and this is no different. So make sure that you don't give up on the budget just because maybe this month you had an unexpected expense, or maybe this month you spent a little more on eating out than you wanted to. Remember that not giving up is the most important thing. So most critical ingredient in any successful financial plan is a budget. It's knowing what's going on with your money. So let's talk about that. What are some of, and you guys can put this in the chat here, what are some of the emotions you associate with the word budget? What are the emotions we associate with that word? Yeah, Wendy, we are going to definitely talk about some of those resources, and he's one of them. Yeah, we definitely stress, fear, restraint. I love, love, love those things that are coming to mind. Probably some of these faces are the feelings that we've had. Oh, overwhelmed. These are definitely emotions that are not unique to each of you, right? That the most important thing about a budget is recognizing that the key is to not let the fear overwhelm you. One thing I love about what we've put in the chat as the emotions, is that you guys all shared different words that meant very similar things. So you're not alone in feeling stressed, in feeling fear, in dread, in all of those feelings as they relate to a budget. The good news is there are plenty of other people who are feeling the same way and who have that fear of failure that we see on there. So some things to remember with budgeting: it doesn't have to be scary or restrictive. It doesn't have to be this terrifying thing. All it is creating a plan for what's going to happen with your money. You don't have to get it right the first time around, and you probably won't, to be honest with you. My budget is ever adapting, and I know that there are many months where I'm like, oh, I did not do that well. I did not budget this well. The key is to just get started and to keep working toward it. One thing I love from Dave Ramsey, who was mentioned here, is that the budget is not it is really just taking control over your money. It's telling your money where it's going to go instead of wondering what happened, instead of looking at your bank account and going, oh, I thought I had more money than that. So here are some reasons why you should budget. Helps keep your spending organized. It helps you not spend more than what you actually have. It balances your expenses and your income. And it helps you know where money is spent. And we'll talk about some of those tools and resources again that will be helpful there. We're going to talk about those in just a moment. But give me a yes in the chat if you feel like, man, I need something super fancy to keep track of my budget. How many of you feel like, oh, I need this crazy technology. I need something super fancy and that I'm not going to understand in order to track my budget. Give me a yes in the chat if you've ever felt that way. Okay. See a couple people. Let me show you all you need to create a budget is a piece of paper and a calculator. All you need is paper and some way to keep track of that, to be able to add that money up. Maybe you're really good at mental math, so maybe you don't need a physical calculator, but all you need is to get started is a piece of paper and some way to add those funds up. Excel is a great thing. I love an Excel spreadsheet for a variety of reasons, but there are lots of resources that are available to you that can help you out. So we've mentioned a couple of them. In fact, I think almost all of these have been mentioned already in our chat. So mint.com is a great resource that you enter in your information and it sends you, you can have it send you a regular update on how you're spending your money. I have personally used this one, and let me tell you, when I got an end of week summary that said you spent X number of dollars on eating out, I went, whoa, what was I doing? Why did I spend that much money on that? Dave Ramsey is another great resource, which is available online. Every dollar was mentioned in our chat earlier, and my company, Citibank, also offers a free resource online where you can create a budget. So the cool thing is, not only does budgeting not have to be a very complicated thing, it also doesn't have to be something that costs you money out of pocket. Bethany, that is a great question. Some of these resources may have paid versions of them, but others they also have free versions. So the basic membership for Mint is free and basically breaks down how your purchases are, or where your money is going for you, and does that summary for you. There are some additional things that may be part of a paid membership. All right, so since we have talked about those budgets out there and the resources that are available, let's break down what that budget's going to include. Your budget is going to include wants and needs. So first thing we need to understand is, what is the difference? Our needs are food, shelter, and clothing, right? Those are the things we absolutely need every single day. Food, shelter, and clothing. Other necessities include reliable transportation, making sure that we have those utilities paid and insurance coverage, cell phone bills, personal care expenses, and if you have children, potentially childcare expenses. These are things that are needs or necessities. Our wants are virtually everything else. Anything that doesn't fall under one of these categories up here as food, shelter, clothing, or generally utilities is what the rest of those really categorize as. Everything else is in a category of wants and could be cut back. Notice that our keyword here is not cut out, but cut back. All of these resources are free. They may have additional resources that are paid as well. They may have come with a paid membership. So let's talk about some wants that are disguised as needs. We need food, but we don't necessarily need steak and lobster every night. We need shelter, but we don't need the most expensive house on the block that also has the in-ground pool and all of those other things. We need clothing, but we don't need the most expensive clothing out there. So it's important for us to take care of the necessities first, but make sure that you are keeping an eye on a few of those wants and allowing yourself to include those things. It's good to budget for both your wants and your needs so that we don't feel that sense of burnout. We don't feel that sense of, I saw some things that people felt in the chat were restrictive, right? That we feel like a budget prevents me from being able to have fun. And that's not what a budget is designed to do. A good budget allows you to have some of those wants in there as well, and allows you to account for those, to give yourself the opportunity to really do that. Because if we don't budget for both our needs and our wants. Actually, let me answer that question with another question. Give me a yes if you've ever forced yourself onto a really strict diet at any point in your life. There are a lot of them out there. Maybe you're like me and you love pasta, and at one point in your life you did a no carb diet. Give me a yes in the chat if you've ever done that. Okay, I see some, yep, definitely some yeses coming through. And what happens after a day, a week, a month of that really strict diet? Something like this. Same thing can happen with your budget if you're not realistic with those numbers. If you're not realistic with what you're allowing yourself to do, is you may have that sense of burnout, and you may kind of, as we say, fall off the wagon, right? So the key is telling you, allowing yourself that opportunity to purchase things that you do want in addition to the needs. I love this quote from William Feather that says, it doesn't prevent you from buying those things that you can't afford. It just tells you that you can't afford it. So we're going to go through just a couple more things, and then we'll open up. We've got about 2 more minutes, and then we'll open to our Q&A session. The key to, as you're building your budget, we'll give you access to this handout as well, is to recognize the difference between a fixed and a variable expense. Recognizing that things like your rent or your mortgage are unlikely to change, and those are going to be fixed expenses every month. While other things like potentially gifts you may purchase, or eating out, or even potentially the amount of gas that you use, are variable. These are not things that you can give an exact dollar to every month. So it's okay to use estimates. Make sure that you are starting somewhere, and starting with those estimates is a great place to go. It's a great place for you to say, this is about what I think I'm spending every month. And then as you look back at your purchases, you can see the real numbers and utilize that to adapt that budget. Remember that a true working budget takes lots of time to establish, way more time than we have in our session. But there are some things that I want to just highlight as far as getting that budget started. Number one, be realistic. If you repeatedly underestimate or overestimate, then you're not going to be realistic. Make sure that as you are creating that first budget, that you are allowing yourself the opportunity to be realistic. For me, the best thing that I've ever done is to overestimate what I think things are going to cost. I talk about this in relation to Disney, especially. I was talking with my family about this. We are in Florida, that I walk into a Disney store and I'm like, okay, this thing that I want is going to cost this much. And I tend to overestimate it. So when I see the actual price tag, it's less crazy. Or I walk in and say, this is what I can afford to spend on this thing. And if it's less than that, I'll allow myself to buy it. Being realistic in our budget is a great place to start, by saying, overestimating the amount that you think it might cost for something is a great way to start. So that way, if you do have money left over, you can set that aside for savings. The document that we'll give you guys access to does break down these different things into different categories. And the things I want to call attention to are these 3 columns: the amount that you originally budgeted, the amount that you actually spent, and what was the difference? Did you overestimate and budget too much? Did you underestimate and not have enough to cover it? Those are the 3 columns. I'm not going to highlight too many of these specific sections in here, but you can see all of these different categories of the different things you might be spending your money on. And the key is to start here, is to say, this is the amount that I think this is going to cost. This is the amount at the end of the month review. This is what it actually costs. Here was the difference. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go through the different pieces of this, which again, will give you access to that link as well. I'll drop that in the chat shortly. The key then is to keep this constantly utilizing it from month to month. And you may use this exact form, you may use something different. Remember, that the benefits of budgeting is giving you, one, that peace of mind. You know what's happening, you know what to expect. Number two, making sure that you have that increased ability to know what's happening. You're deciding where your money goes and how that money is being spent. And then it gives you that ability to find that additional money in your plan that you can set aside for short-term, long-term savings. Additionally, budgeting really allows you to see what your financial position is. It really allows you to know, I'm in a good place, I'm in a less than optimal place, or I could really, really use some help. And we have that satisfaction of a job well done. For me, I love budgeting. I love the idea of budgeting because it's a game. At the end of the day, I get to say, I was right on, I was not quite there. It's like, I love The Price is Right. I always tell people, I love those old game shows. I love Wheel of Fortune. I love Price is Right. And part of the reason I love The Price is Right is that satisfaction of knowing that I guessed the exact amount of what that item was worth. So giving yourself that flexibility to congratulate yourself and move forward is a great way for you to really focus on that budget. So I know we went over a lot of information fairly quickly. I did see one question earlier about the envelopes method and how that could be best utilized. One thing that is really helpful is when you're starting with that envelopes method, it can be helpful to actually pull the cash out and put it in those different envelopes and utilize that. I know that there are softwares that are free and some of them that we've talked about that allow you to kind of break that down. What other questions do we have about our budgeting 101? Yes, Aubrielle, that 3-column format is my favorite thing in the world because it really allows you to see where you were in comparison, right? It's kind of that grading on a curve that you allow yourself, this is what the amount that I thought it was going to cost, here's what it actually costs, and then here's the difference. And my personal preference is anything that I budgeted over is to set that aside into savings, into maybe an emergency savings or long-term savings, anything that I over budgeted to set aside for something in the future. Having that emergency savings is a huge, Angelina, I don't have a spouse, so that's a great question. But I think the key that we've talked about in our general session today is just having that conversation. Communication is critical to everything we do. Bethany, that's a great question. I know that a lot of local, especially the credit unions, offer financial plan or budgeting. I did mention that one of the resources that I mentioned is my own company, which is Citibank, that there are similar resources to the ones that we've presented. Yeah, Jen, as far as the amount in emergency savings, that is going to be dependent on the person. My ideal is to have 1 year so that if something were to happen, I could have not only that cushion of time to survive, but also to find other employment or something if something along that lines happened. Sarah, that question about budgeting with an inconsistent income is actually one of the most critical things you can do is figure out what your expenses are, right? Know what are the things that you have to take care of every month. What is the cost of rent or mortgage? What is the absolute minimum amount that I need to bring in so that I can cover these basic expenses? And in fact, an inconsistent income is possibly the best place to start because you may not know how much more you have available versus being on a salary where you know exactly what the dollar amount's going to be. Aubrielle, I have different accounts for different things. So I have the debit card that I mentioned is specifically for Disney. I don't touch that money until I'm ready to go on the trip. And that's what it's there for. It's for travel. And then I have like a checking account that I use for bills and a checking account that I use for fun. Like I just have everything all separated into different things. And I will drop the link to this in here. Give me one moment. I'm going to drop the link to the budgeting spreadsheet, which is a PDF that you can print and utilize at any time. We are nearing we have about a minute left. So I'm going to quickly get that dropped in here. You know, one of the things that I always tell people in my new hire classes with my job is that practice makes permanent, not perfect. So doing this every month or every day or however often you need to do it is what's going to be what gets you in that consistent habit. So building a habit is the first step. Getting yourself started is the first step. And let me just drop that link in here. Here is the link to the document, which hoping will work. You might have to copy and paste it because for whatever reason it didn't copy as a link, but that is the link to the Dropbox where you can download that document. All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for being here. Remember that the first step is getting your attitude toward money straight. Everything else will straighten itself out. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And hopefully you took something away. Enjoy the rest of your day.